Welcome to Hot Hero Sandwich with Henry Fonda, Ron Howard, Loretta Lynn, and Marlo Thomas. In conversation with Tom Cottle.
Pregnancy and what it meant to be pregnant and how babies were born? Or...
No, how could you know? You know, how could have I known? At that age, and you just don't learn anything like that in school, where I went to school.
I think I recall maybe it was your father or someone said that sometimes babies were born just coming up from under a cabbage leaf.
Oh yeah, Daddy, I'd say, if you brought this up at home, you know, when you were little, why, they found you under a cabbage leaf, or the doctors brought you, you know, or the nurse brought you, or whatever, you know. You were just, this was just something that wasn't talked about. Of course, today I know that it should be talked about with children when they get old enough. I think it would be a big help to a girl.
You know, one time I heard in school about what sex was, and I wasn't quite sure, but it seemed like what they were saying was that the mother and the father wee-weed on each other. That's what I thought they said, because it had to do with those organs, and I just couldn't believe it. And my mother picked me up from school, and I was very upset, and she said, "What is it?" And I said, "I know you don't do this." And I told her what I thought it was, and she said, "Oh, of course that's not what people do. That's just ridiculous." And she said, "No," she said, "what they do is, you know," and she explained in some way, I don't remember exactly what she said, but she explained in some way that men and women did take off their clothes and private parts of their bodies were involved in this act. And I was listening pretty intently, and I said, "Well, do you and Daddy do it?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, "And your father's really good at it." And I never forgot it. I can remember what street we were parked at. We were parked at this light on Beverly Boulevard. I remember for as long as I live, and I remember turning away from her and thinking, "Oh, really? Wait a minute. This is actually something that my mother thinks my father does well." I mean, this had a whole other, it looked interesting and inviting. She was very Italian and candid.
Well, I really wanted to be a basketball player. And my dad is 6 feet tall. I'm 5'9". I always expected, you know, that the kid naturally grows to be, you know, a couple inches taller than the father. So I figured to be 6'2", which is not bad because Jerry West was 6'3". Only an inch shorter than Jerry West would still be, you know, adequate. Well, at one point there, I realized I was not going to even make 6 feet. Then I went into this big weight training thing of trying to build my legs up because Calvin Murphy was only 5'9". And he was, at that point, still in college, but a great scorer. And so he became kind of an idol there for me for a while. And a sort of a role model. And I hoped to be able to build up my legs so I could jump like Calvin Murphy, develop all that quickness, and still make it to the NBA, you know.
In a way, you're sort of torn between two worlds, the athletics, the acting. Did that make you sad?
Well, I never really got emotional about it. But definitely depressed, yeah. I knew that the business was a handful in itself and that's what I really wanted to do. So I did have to, and I did acknowledge that the basketball thing was a fantasy and it just wasn't going to work out for me.
Were you ever seriously ill when you were young?
Yes, I had mastoid. Am I saying this right?
Mastoids?
Is that what it is? Mastoids?
Mastoids.
Well, I never say anything right, I guess. Behind both ears. And Mommy said that I took this when I was 11 months old, just when I first started walking. And I kept this till I was 4, and I never walked till I was 4. And the doctor gave me up to die 3 different times. And Mommy said my ears was, you know, right like this. And they would had peeled back at this time, you know. It was really, really dangerous. They cut the scalp and pulled the scalp back and scraped the bone, and they drilled a little hole right here in the back of my ear, and it's still a quickie spot there. And Mommy and Daddy walked to town and back every day, which was 12 miles there and 12 miles back with me. And in the winter they would wrap me in quilts. And I do remember a little bit about a quilt wrapped around me, but I don't remember any pain at all. I didn't walk till I was 4. Maybe that's why I'm so clumsy.
I was a shrimp. I really was. Peter was the same growing up. He got suddenly, between one year and another, around the same time of, 17 and 18 years old, he shot up, and I did too at the same time. And I think a lot of maybe my shyness and self-consciousness had to do with I wasn't as big as my peers. If I walked down the hall with a friend that was in the same class, and we'd stop at his locker to put some books away or get some books out of his locker, his head was always here, I remember. And I was self-conscious that I was short.
Hot Hero Sandwich will return after these messages. Hot Hero Sandwich.
You have had an experience which is rather rare, but you do share it with other women and young girls, of being particularly beautiful, particularly attractive. How do you feel about that?
Well, I never thought of myself as beautiful. And I don't know.
How did you think of yourself?
I was very skinny. I was always very skinny, and my knees always had bandages on them, and I was, my hair was stringy and straight, which now is fashionable, but in those days I was always begging my mother for a permanent or something to make my hair curly, and I don't know. I don't know anybody who thinks of themselves as beautiful. Maybe I just don't know anyone who does.
That you wore when you were small?
Well, Mommy made me all my little dresses out of feed sack, colored, and they started coming out with colored feed sacks. I don't know if anybody knows about this or not, but Daddy would get, they were Midlands, they called them. You know what they are, don't you? That you feed your cows and stuff. Daddy had a milk cow, so that's what he fed the cow, was Midlands. And every time that Daddy would go get a sack of Midlands, it would come in a big colored sack when he started getting them colored. And sometimes they were pretty, like with the flowers. They had them, it's like the material that you buy. And Mommy would make my dresses out of that. And she would design clothes, a lot like the clothes they have today. I mean, and Mommy put colors together back then that other people never thought about doing. And today, they wear different colors. Well, you would have never heard of people wearing blue and green together, would you? Back in them days, Mommy did. Mommy was ahead of her time.
We now return to Hot Hero Sandwich.
Did you have a close friend you could talk to about sexual issues, sexual problems, dating problems?
But I was a very protected kid, I wasn't allowed to date, until I was 16, and that was in a group. But we talked about it, We used to talk about how you kiss and what you do, and if you open your mouth a little bit or keep it closed, or we'd practice on our pillow. My girlfriend, this was the one with the 2 older brothers. Camille, right. We'd put Old Spice on the pillow and then practice kissing. It was cute, though.
Hard to recapture those good days, isn't it?
But it was funny. When I think of it now, how hard we were trying to figure it out.
She was in this English class that we had together, and I was very just attracted to her. I just thought she was cute, and I thought she was energetic, but I was too scared to do anything about it. And finally, I was getting ready to leave to go do the Smith family, and I was getting my assignments from the teacher and everything, and Cheryl spoke up, and she said, "Well, are you still going to play basketball this year?" And I said, "Yeah." As a matter of fact, and we had about a 1-minute conversation about basketball and how I would be coming back to school soon and so forth. And that was it, but that was enough. That she was really a nice girl, and she had spoken to me first, and maybe there was some interest there. So I went and I agonized for a long time over how to do this, and I looked up, and her name was Allie, Cheryl Allie, and there was only one Allie in Burbank. Well, that was easy. I got her telephone number and her address, but I couldn't call her. So I went in my new car, and whenever I would get off the Smith family a little bit early, I would go and I would drive by her house, kind of in hopes that somehow she would be out there watering the lawn or something, and I could stop and say, "Hey, aren't you in my English class?" Well, that never worked out. Then I figured out that she walked home from school. And so then I would like drive up and down the route that she was supposed to walk home from school. And I never could bump into her. So God, this went on for a long time, probably a month. And it was just driving me crazy. Finally, I called the girl up. It was traumatic, but I did it. And using the excuse that I was trying to get an English assignment or something, I spoke to her for a while and really had a great conversation. And finally said, well, would you like to go to a movie? So she said, oh, I got to ask my dad. Later I found out she didn't have to ask her dad, but she just had to take some time to think about it. And so 5 minutes later, I guess, she came back and said, okay. And I went and I picked her up. And God, I had the greatest time. It was just wonderful. I mean, in the first 20, 30 minutes of the evening there, as we were driving to the theater, we were laughing it up, and she was telling me how when she was 8 years old, she wanted to play on a football team, and so she had short hair, and she called herself Charlie Alley, and she played on the team, and then the coach found out she was a girl and threw her off, and I thought that was great. And you know, I don't know, to me, that was what, I went home and I told my parents, now that is what a date is supposed to be like.
Well, I was a bossy little kid, you know, and I sort of had my father figured out pretty good. You know, I was the first child, I was the daughter, and first... So I really had him. If I could make my father laugh, I could have anything. So I was very good at making him laugh. And with my mother, I was just faster than my mother. So between being faster than my mother and being able to make my father laugh, I was pretty much in control. I mean, I was like James Garner in that movie, Americanization of Emily, you know. I mean, I was like this little con man. And my brother and sister, I couldn't stand it when anybody was unfair to them or things weren't working out well for them. So I would go to battle for them.
Well, you had sisters, I believe.
I had two sisters, both, I was the oldest. Harriet was a year and a half younger, and Jane was a year and a half younger than Harriet. So we were really very close, except that when you're very young, a year and a half is a big difference. I remember in high school, when we began going to dances, and my mother would ask me to take Harriet. That was just awful. They have to take your young sister to a dance.
Hot Hero Sandwich will return after these messages. We now return to Hot Hero Sandwich.
I used to get a big kick out of giving Clint my finger, and he would like bite on it, you know. And then pretty soon he got these teeth. And I was still dumb enough to give him my finger. One day I gave it to him, and those teeth were in there now, you know, and bit down hard, and that hurt. I quit doing that. But he would always say, you know, want to grab my hand and keep gnawing on my finger. Things like that. Then, when he was about 5, by that time I was really into my sports craze there. And Clint was beginning to have the coordination to be able to play wiffle ball, which is a game that you play with a plastic bat and ball. And, you know, my kid brother could hit that thing. And we got started really playing quite a bit together. And then we used to play a lot of sports together. And that was really nice.
I woke up crying. I had dreamed that Daddy was dead. I seen him laying in his coffin. And Daddy had a blue suit on, and he was laying in this wine coffin. And I was just wringing my hands and just crying. And I woke myself up crying, and I woke my husband up crying. And I said, Daddy is dead. And Dew says, no, he says, your daddy's not dead. When you dream of a death like this, it's a sign of, I've heard it's a sign of a wedding. Said, I bet it's your sister that's going to get married, Peggy Sue. Well, he put it in my mind that it was Peggy Sue getting married, and that's all I wanted to believe. So I said, well, they're going to be down here in a little while, and they're going to tell me I got a telephone call, and Peggy's going to tell me that she's going to get married. Wasn't 5 minutes later that a knock was on the door. I went to the door, and I looked at the door, and I said, see, I told you that they were going to come down here and tell me Peggy's getting married. He said, Loretta, there's a long-distance telephone call for you. So it was my sister-in-law, and she was on the telephone. She said, Loretta said, this is really bad. She said, now the rest of the family would talk to or call you and tell you. But she says, your daddy just died. And I remember looking back over to my husband and saying, Daddy died, you know, and I guess I was in shock for a while. And when you've never had anything like that to happen to anybody that's that close to you or close to home, how can you believe that your daddy is going to die? How can you believe that something like that's going to happen to one of your family? You know, you can't believe it till it happens. And when it happens, you know, it's something you don't ever get over. And I made it a point at that time. I almost went crazy, you know, because I hadn't seen Daddy but one time in 7 years, because I lived so far away. And I made it a point to never leave any of my brothers and sisters, never talk to them on the phone, never see my mother, never talk to her on the phone that I didn't say, I love you. And I always do. I think everybody should, because someday it might be too late.
My son Peter today, he's almost 40 years old. He's still my baby boy, but that's not a kid. He is only in the last year, and he did it deliberately, he finally told me, got me to say, I love you, son. It's hard not to be emotional about that. To have it pointed out to you by your son that you didn't know how to say I love you. And now he says it. Every time we talk on the phone, he ends by saying, I love you, Dad. And now it's easy. Isn't that amazing?
Hot Hero Sandwich. We'll be back after these messages.